The next question becomes, is there something that we can find in laboratories that vitamin D does at the cellular level? Is there something that vitamin D does when it gets inside of a cell that changes cancer risk? So while Garland and other experts were busy doing population studies, many of the vitamin D researchers were busy doing basic science work in their labs, and they were looking at cell lines of cancer, different kinds of cancer, breast, prostate, colon, so forth. What vitamin D does is what's kind of surprising, because vitamin D was called a vitamin, so people thought it was involved in energy management and what a lot of other vitamins do. It's actually not a vitamin. It's a hormone that regulates the turning on or the activation of genes. And we're sitting here with 26 or 27,000 genes in every one of our cells, and most of them are not doing anything because they haven't been turned on or activated. And vitamin D activates over 900 different genes. And we know that because there's been some studies where they actually take the human genome and they run all these things with the vitamin D receptors against the genome and actually are able to find out where there's a gene segment that interfaces with the vitamin D receptor. This is very scientific. It's not like just a number off the top of somebody's head. Of those 900 genes that are turned on by vitamin D, 60 of them relate to cancer prevention. So when we say cancer prevention, what are we talking about? Well, for example, one of them is called P53. It's a very famous gene. It protects the whole genome, and it regulates about 36 other genes, all of which are vitamin D sensitive. And this complex basically goes along genetic material. As each cell is reproducing and making a copy of itself, this complex of genes sends out little proteins that go along the new material to make sure there's no errors in it. Now, errors happen all the time when we're copying our cells, and that's how genetic changes happen, and that's how cancers can happen. So one of the big genes that is active is the one that goes along to make sure that there's not errors. And if there is an error, machinery for replicating itself is turned off. Another gene is brought in to try to repair that. If the repair can't happen, then the cell is instructed to sort of digest itself. So there's a whole regulation of, bad cells don't get to copy themselves if there's enough D to turn these genes on. On the other hand, if there are a nest of cells already growing, there's certain genes that are D sensitive that will keep those cells in line so they don't break off and spread to other parts of the body. There's another gene that inhibits growth of blood vessels into tumors so that turns off the supply of new energy and oxygen to growing nests of cancer cells. So there's 60-some genes that are involved here. So the answer to the question is there something that's happening at the cellular level that we could find in a biology lab that explains how vitamin D could impact cancer? Absolutely, it's been well defined. There's a lot more to learn, but we do have clear mechanisms by which vitamin D is impacting cancer. The third and final step, though, is the treatment trial. What happens if you give a group of people extra vitamin D and you follow them for 3 or 4 years? Do they have less cancers? Okay. So this question was asked a decade or so ago, and following the recommendations of the 1997 report, they gave these people 400 units of vitamin D, and it didn't have any impact. It's not surprising that it didn't have any impact, because from those curves I showed you, it didn't raise the level enough to have any impact. So the problem is when an agency like the Institute of Medicine makes the statement that you don't need more than a certain amount of vitamin D, then the NIH won't fund a study that gives a lot more, and no university, hospital, or medical center can run a study that violates so dramatically the recommendations, so they don't get done. In any case, in 2007, a remarkable study did get past the Institutional Review Board, and a woman by the name of Joan Lapp published this remarkable study. They got 1,100 units approved to use per day on patients. It took almost 1,200 women. They were all 55 years of age or older. So we're taking sort of a quarter of the population. So this is the older female group of the population. We're not talking about older men. We're not talking about younger people. But nevertheless, it's a good segment of the population. 1/3 of them got no treatment. They got a pill to take, but there was nothing in it. The next third got 50 milligrams of calcium. Now, calcium does seem to have an impact on cancer. I suspect it's because when there's lots of calcium, you don't use your vitamin D to bring in calcium. You use it for other chores, but nobody's proved that hypothesis. In any case, the third group then got that calcium, but the 1,100 units of vitamin D as well. The women were followed for 4 years. They were given the same regimen for the entire 4 years. The group that got no treatment was considered to be the starting standard, so that's what everybody was compared to. The group that got the calcium only had a 41% reduction in cancer. So there were 41% fewer cancers in their group. But in the group that got the vitamin D along with the calcium, there was a 77% reduction in cancers. Okay? So it's very interesting because back when Gardner was projecting these numbers that looked like this chart, he said, well, if everybody in North America had 52 nanograms per milliliter blood levels of vitamin D, we would prevent 60,000 cases a year of colon cancer and 85,000 cases a year of breast cancer. That's 148,000 cases of cancer every year. That's a lot of cases. That sounded outrageous. And then the same year, this actual study came in, she had 77% fewer cancers. So that was the first one that actually was able to show a treatment trial that worked. Okay. Yes, we still have to do more on the younger segment of the population, on older men, yes. We should be using higher doses. She only was able to get an average of 37 in the blood. Now that's enough by these statistics to have a significant impact on colon cancer. It's not enough to have an impact on most women for breast cancer. So what if they had given 2,200 or even 3,000 units a day? We don't know. My final conclusion from all of this, we really have already met the 3 steps, the criteria for proving that vitamin D has a preventive effect on cancer development. We have population studies that over and over show it. We have the biological mechanisms by which it happens, and we have a treatment trial that was well done and showed dramatic impact at a relatively low dose. Okay? So from my point of view, at least for the issue of cancer, the Institute of Medicine has misstated itself. There really is evidence to support the effect of vitamin D in cancer prevention.